For the longest time, I thought I had it all. A beautiful wife, a cozy home, and a job that allowed me to provide for us. My wife, Emily, was everything I had ever dreamed of. She was kind, witty, and stunningly beautiful. When I married her 7 years ago, I knew I was the luckiest man alive. Our life together seemed picture perfect. Mornings began with shared cups of coffee, evenings were filled with laughter and the comfort of her presence. She worked as a graphic designer from home, which meant she was always around when I got back from my long hours as a project manager. I loved that. There was no distance, no guessing game. Or so I thought. The first sign that something was amiss wasn't even a sign, it was nothing. No fights, no arguments, no suspicions. Emily's behavior was as warm and affectionate as always. It's just that I felt off. Like a crack in a perfectly smooth wall, visible only when the light hit at just the right angle. It started with her new fitness routine. Emily had always been naturally fit, but 3 months ago, she joined a yoga studio that she claimed was life-changing. She would gush about how amazing the sessions were, how centered they made her feel. I admired her dedication and teased her about becoming a full-blown yogi. But I couldn't deny how radiant she looked. She also began spending more time with her girlfriends, or so she said. Every couple of weeks she would plan a girls' night out, dressing up in a way she hadn't in years. I found it endearing. She deserved to feel beautiful and have fun with her friends. But every now and then, something would nag at me. Maybe it was the way she'd quickly turn off her phone when I walked into the room. Or the rare nights when I'd wake up and find her sitting on the couch in the dark, her phone illuminating her face, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "You okay?" I'd ask groggily. "Just couldn't sleep," she'd reply, putting her phone down and coming back to bed. I didn't press her. Why would I? Trust was the foundation of our marriage. At least, that's what I believed. It wasn't until our anniversary dinner last month that I felt the first real pang of unease. Emily had gone all out, reserving a table at one of the fanciest restaurants in town. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her figure perfectly, and her smile that night was radiant. But when I leaned in to kiss her, I caught a whiff of something that made my stomach churn, a faint scent of cologne, one that wasn't mine. I dismissed it immediately. Maybe it was from a hug she'd given a male friend at yoga or some waiter brushing past her. But the thought lingered, planting itself in the back of my mind like an unwelcome guest. The doubts grew louder 2 weeks ago, when Emily left for an impromptu weekend retreat with her yoga group. I had no reason to suspect anything, but the timing felt odd. We'd barely had time for each other lately, and her leaving so suddenly stung more than I expected. She sent me photos of serene beaches and group meditations, but something about them seemed off, too staged, too perfect. I tried to ignore these feelings, blaming my paranoia on work stress. But this morning, as I kissed her goodbye before heading to the office, I couldn't shake the unease. Her gaze lingered a little too long on her phone, and her goodbye kiss felt like a preoccupied afterthought. For the first time in 7 years, I wondered if I truly knew the woman I had married. But the idea of her hiding anything from me seemed ridiculous. We were happy, weren't we? At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The rest of that day at work was uneventful, though I couldn't shake the lingering unease. My team and I had a major presentation due, and while I should have been focused on finalizing the details, my thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her distracted smile, the quick flick of her thumb across her phone, and the vague way she'd brushed off my questions about her plans. "Jake, you okay, man?" my coworker Nate asked as he leaned over my desk. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Yeah, just tired," I said with a half-hearted chuckle. "Tired? Dude, you're always the Energizer Bunny. What's going on?" For a moment, I considered confiding in him, but the thought of voicing my concerns felt absurd. What was I supposed to say? That I thought my wife might be hiding something because of a weird feeling I couldn't even articulate? It sounded paranoid, even to me. "Nothing," I said finally, waving him off. "Just a lot on my plate." By the time I got home, I had almost convinced myself I was imagining things. Almost. Emily was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming a tune as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She was wearing one of my oversized college t-shirts, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked so comfortable and carefree that I felt foolish for doubting her. "Hey, babe," she said, smiling up at me. "How was your day?" "Busy," I replied, loosening my tie. "What about you?" Same old, she said with a shrug. "Yoga this morning, then I worked on a few designs for that new client." The casual ease in her voice put me at ease, and we fell into our usual rhythm. I helped her set the table while she finished dinner, and soon we were seated, talking about our day. But halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it quickly, her hand hesitating mid-air as she reached for her glass of wine. For a split second, her expression changed, subtle but noticeable. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just a notification," she said, brushing it off. "Probably an email. Anything urgent?" "Nope." She smiled, but it felt forced. After dinner, I offered to clean up while she went upstairs to shower. I told myself I wasn't going to check her phone. I told myself I trusted her. But as I loaded the dishwasher, the device buzzed again. It was sitting right there on the counter, screen lighting up briefly. The temptation was unbearable. I walked over, glanced at the screen, and saw a notification for a new message from a contact saved as Jen Yoga. I hesitated, heart pounding. Was it wrong to look? Did I even have the right? But something about the name didn't sit right with me. Emily had mentioned her yoga friends plenty of times, and I didn't recall any Jen. I picked up the phone, the guilt already gnawing at me. Swiping up to unlock it, I was stopped by her passcode screen. My stomach sank. Emily had never used a passcode before, not until recently. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath, putting the phone back where I'd found it. When Emily came back downstairs later, her damp hair curling around her shoulders, I felt a tight knot of frustration in my chest. She sat beside me on the couch, curling into my side as we watched one of our favorite shows, but I couldn't focus. Every time her phone buzzed or vibrated, I felt a pang of suspicion. By the time we went to bed, I was emotionally exhausted. Lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. Was I overreacting? Was this just paranoia? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life? The next day, I decided I needed answers. At lunch, I sat in my car, staring at my phone. My hands were trembling slightly as I typed into the search bar, "How to hire a private investigator." The decision to hire a private investigator wasn't an easy one. It felt invasive, almost dirty. But as I sat there in my car during lunch, staring at my search results, the nagging doubts refused to let me rest. My gut told me that something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I chose a local agency with good reviews and discreet services. The investigator assigned to my case was a man named Bill Carson. When I met him later that evening in his small office downtown, he immediately put me at ease with his calm demeanor and professionalism. "What's going on?" Bill asked, leaning back in his chair. I hesitated, still unsure if I was making the right call. "I don't even know if there's anything to investigate," I admitted. "It's just, my wife has been acting differently. She's more secretive than she used to be. New habits, new routines. And her phone, she's never locked it before." Bill nodded knowingly. "You'd be surprised how often I hear that. People underestimate how much their habits change when they're hiding something. I don't want to jump to conclusions," I said, my voice faltering. "I love her. But I can't shake this feeling that she's not being honest with me." "I get it," he said. "Here's how it works. I'll keep things discreet. Surveillance, checking her movements, gathering evidence. If there's nothing to find, you'll know for sure. But if there is, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it." I handed over a recent photo of Emily and gave him a rundown of her daily schedule, along with her usual hangouts. As I left his office, a knot of guilt twisted in my stomach. Was I betraying her by doing this? Or was I just protecting myself? 2 weeks passed, and during that time, I tried to act as normal as possible. Emily didn't seem to notice anything different, but I couldn't help scrutinizing her every move. Every time she left the house for yoga or a girls' night, I wondered if Bill was tailing her, if he'd discovered anything. The call came late one evening while Emily was upstairs. "Jake, it's Bill." His voice came through the line. "We need to meet. Tomorrow, if possible." "What's going on?" I asked, my heart pounding. "It's better if we talk in person." I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities. By the time I arrived at Bill's office the next day, I was a wreck. He didn't waste any time. "I have something to show you," he said, sliding a USB drive across the desk. "What's this?" I asked, my throat dry. "Footage. I'll let you watch it on your own." I plugged the drive into my laptop as soon as I got home. My hands were shaking as the video loaded. It was grainy at first, showing a hotel lobby. Then the camera panned, and there she was, Emily, dressed to the nines, holding hands with a man I didn't recognize. My stomach lurched as I fast-forwarded through the video. The pair walked to the elevator, laughing. The next shot showed them in a hotel suite, the room's angle giving a clear view of their actions. My heart shattered as I watched Emily with not just the man, but 2 others as well, their bodies entwined in ways I could hardly comprehend. I slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. For a moment, I thought I might be sick. My chest felt like it was caving in, the air thick and suffocating. How could she? How could the woman I loved, the woman I trusted above all else, do something like this? I sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the wall. Anger, pain, and humiliation swirled inside me, threatening to consume me entirely. But as the emotions raged, a cold clarity began to settle over me. If she thought she could humiliate me and get away with it, she was dead wrong. By the next morning, I had a plan. I called a number I never thought I'd dial, a high-end escort service I'd heard about in whispers. "I need someone tonight," I told the woman on the other end of the line. "Someone who doesn't ask questions." She assured me that everything would be handled with the utmost discretion. That evening, I made sure Emily thought everything was normal. I kissed her goodbye as she left for yoga, already imagining her surprise when she came home. It was almost midnight when the escort arrived. Her name was Amber, and she was everything I'd expected, stunning, confident, and professional. "You sure about this?" she asked as I led her inside. "Just follow my lead," I said. We were in bed when I heard the front door open. "Jake?" Emily's voice called out. The look on her face when she walked into the bedroom was worth every penny I'd spent. "Jake, what the hell is this?" Emily's voice cracked with a mix of shock and fury as she froze in the doorway, her eyes darting between me and Amber, who was still sprawled across the bed in nothing but a sheet. "Oh, you're home early," I said, my voice dripping with mock casualness. "This isn't what it looks like." Emily's face contorted, her confusion quickly morphing into rage. "What do you mean, not what it looks like? There's a naked woman in our bed." Amber, to her credit, played her part perfectly. "Should I go?" she asked, her voice coy as she pulled the sheet tighter around herself. "No need to rush," I replied, smirking at Emily. "Unless my wife has something she'd like to say." Emily's mouth opened and closed as if she were searching for the right words. Finally, she exploded. "What the hell is wrong with you, Jake? How could you do this to me? To us?" I stood up, grabbing a pair of jeans from the floor and pulling them on slowly. "Oh, you mean us? Thus you've been thinking about while sneaking around behind my back?" Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I grabbed my laptop from the nightstand and turned it on, my fingers moving with deliberate precision as I navigated to the video Bill had sent me. Emily stood frozen as I spun the screen around to face her. "Recognize this?" I asked, my tone icy. She stared at the screen, her eyes widening as the footage played. The color drained from her face as the full weight of the video's contents hit her. Jake, Save it! I snapped, slamming the laptop shut. I didn't say a word when I started noticing the signs. When you locked your phone, when you started sneaking around for yoga or girls' nights. I kept quiet because I wanted to believe you weren't capable of this. Her hands trembled as she stepped closer. It's not what you think. Not what I think. I cut her off, my voice rising. Emily, I watched you. I watched you with 3 different men in a hotel room. So please, enlighten me, what exactly am I misunderstanding here? Amber, still lounging on the bed, gave a low whistle. Yikes. Tough night for you, huh? She said, addressing Emily with a smirk. Get out. Emily snarled at her, her fists clenched at her sides. Don't talk to her like that, I said sharply. Amber's just doing her job. Unlike you, she's honest about what she's here for. Emily's face contorted with rage. You're disgusting, she spat. No, I said, stepping closer, my voice low and venomous. What's disgusting is pretending to be the perfect wife while screwing half the yoga studio. What's disgusting is humiliating me and thinking I'd never find out. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Just a cold, simmering anger that had been building for weeks. I made a mistake, she stammered. I wasn't thinking straight. Spare me, I interrupted. You made plenty of mistakes, Emily. Enough to fill an entire damn video. So don't stand there and try to play the victim. She took a shaky step back, her composure crumbling. What do you want me to say, Jake? I was lonely. You were always at work, and I felt invisible. Don't you dare try to put this on me, I snapped. You could have come to me. You could have told me how you were feeling. But instead, you decided to destroy everything we built together. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Amber, sensing the shift, slipped out of bed and began gathering her things. This is my cue to leave, she said breezily. Thanks for your help, I muttered, handing her an envelope of cash. No problem, she said with a wink. Good luck with all this. As the front door clicked shut behind her, Emily and I were left alone. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. I never wanted it to get this far, she whispered. Well, it did, I said flatly. And now we're here. So what's your plan, Emily? Do you want to try and salvage this, or should I just pack my bags now? Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face a mask of desperation. Jake, I love you. I don't want to lose you. I laughed bitterly. You have a funny way of showing it. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You've broken something that can't be fixed, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And I'm done being the fool who believed in you. I turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving her sobbing behind me. But as I stood in the hallway, my mind was already racing with the next steps. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence in the house was deafening. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Emily stayed upstairs, crying sporadically, but I didn't care. Every tear she shed felt like a pathetic attempt to paint herself as the victim. By morning, I decided to take some time off work. There was no way I could sit through meetings and pretend everything was fine. I needed to figure out my next move. Emily was still in the bedroom when I got dressed and grabbed my keys. I didn't bother telling her where I was going. As I stepped outside, the fresh air hit me like a slap, clearing the fog in my head. I drove aimlessly for a while before pulling into a quiet park. I sat on a bench, staring at a group of kids playing soccer in the distance. My mind churned with conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness. But most of all, I felt empty. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Bill, the investigator. Hey, Bill, I answered, my voice hoarse. Jake, just checking in, he said. Wanted to see how you're holding up after the discovery. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, living the dream. Thanks for asking. Listen, I know it's a lot to process, he said carefully. But I thought you'd want to know. I dug a little deeper into one of the guys in the video. The one she seemed the most, comfortable with. My grip tightened on the phone. Yeah? What did you find? He's married, Bill said. Name's Greg Dawson. Works in finance. Wife and 2 kids. They live in the next town over. Married, I repeated, the word like acid in my mouth. Did you contact him? No. That's not my place, Bill said. But if you want to confront him, I've got his contact info. I didn't respond immediately. My mind was racing with possibilities. Confronting Greg felt like an opportunity to expose Emily's betrayal on a larger scale, to drag her actions into the harsh light of day. Send me his number, I said finally. Later that day, I found myself parked outside Greg's office building. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say a dozen times, but as I sat there, my heart pounded in my chest. I got out of the car and walked inside, my footsteps echoing in the sleek marble lobby. The receptionist gave me a polite smile. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here to see Greg Dawson, I said. Do you have an appointment? No, but it's urgent. She hesitated, but something in my tone must have convinced her. One moment, she said, picking up the phone. Minutes later, Greg appeared, his expression a mix of confusion and mild annoyance. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from a cushy job and a 6-figure salary. Do I know you? He asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. No, I said, my tone sharp. But you know my wife. Greg's face froze for a split second before he composed himself. I think you've got the wrong person. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I know about the hotel. I know what you've been doing with Emily. So don't stand there and insult my intelligence. His jaw tightened, and he glanced around nervously. Look, I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice quieter now. I pulled out my phone and showed him a still frame from the video, Emily and him, unmistakable, in the hotel suite. His face went pale. Care to explain this? I asked coldly. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For a moment I thought he might run, but then he sighed heavily and ran a hand through his hair. Look, man, I didn't know she was married, okay? She never mentioned you. I laughed bitterly. Oh, really? That's your excuse? I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. You didn't mean for it to happen? I snapped. You didn't mean to screw another man's wife? Greg looked around again, clearly uncomfortable. Can we take this somewhere private? I don't want to cause a scene. I leaned in, my voice low but seething. You think I care about your reputation? You're lucky I don't drag you outside and beat your ass right here. He raised his hands defensively. Look, I screwed up, okay? I'm sorry. I'll do whatever you want, just don't go to my wife. I stared at him, the wheels turning in my mind. Oh, you're definitely going to tell your wife, I said. And I'll make sure she knows exactly who her husband is. Greg paled further, his confident facade completely crumbled. Jake, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. Please, don't do this. Too late, I said. Your wife deserves to know, just like I did. I walked away, leaving him standing there, panic etched across his face. When I got home, Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. She looked up at me, but I didn't stop to acknowledge her. I went straight to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. She knocked a few minutes later. Jake, can we talk? There's nothing left to say, I said through the door. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The storm was only just beginning, and I was determined to take control of it. The silence between Emily and me in the following days was deafening. She avoided me as much as I avoided her. Her movements were careful, her presence timid, as if afraid that any wrong move might set me off. I let her sit in that tension, stewing in her guilt. Meanwhile, I was planning my next steps. Confronting Greg had been satisfying, but I wasn't done. The people in Emily's life who thought they knew her, her friends, her family, They needed to know the truth. But I had to be smart about it. One wrong move could give Emily the upper hand in a potential divorce. On Friday evening, while Emily was upstairs, I invited our closest friends, Matt and Sarah, over for drinks. They'd been our friends for years, the type of couple who always seemed to have their act together. If there was anyone who'd be shaken by Emily's betrayal, it was them. "Where's Emily?" Sarah asked as she handed me a bottle of wine at the door. "Upstairs," I replied, forcing a smile. "She's been feeling under the weather." The four of us settled in the living room, making small talk and catching up. Emily eventually came downstairs, her face pale as she saw Matt and Sarah sitting there. I could tell she wasn't prepared for this. "Hey, Em," Matt said, raising his beer. "Jake said you weren't feeling well. You okay?" She gave a strained smile. "Yeah, just a headache. I'll be fine." But her eyes darted toward me nervously, as if she sensed something was coming. We chatted for another hour before I decided to drop the bombshell. "Matt, Sarah," I began, leaning forward with my drink in hand. "There's something I need to tell you." Emily's head snapped toward me. "Jake, don't." I held up a hand to silence her. "They deserve to know, Emily. They're our friends." Matt and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. "What's going on?" Sarah asked cautiously. I took a deep breath, pretending to wrestle with my emotions. "Emily's been cheating on me," I said, my voice steady but heavy with feigned sorrow. The room fell into stunned silence. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief, while Matt sat frozen, his beer halfway to his lips. "Jake, stop!" Emily hissed, her face flushed. "I have proof," I continued, ignoring her. "She's been meeting other men at hotels, lying about yoga and girls' nights. It's been going on for months." "Jake!" Emily's voice was shrill now, tears welling in her eyes. Matt finally found his voice. "Wait, what? Emily, is this true?" Her silence spoke volumes. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Emily! I can explain!" Emily stammered, her face streaked with tears. "It's not what you think." "Really?" I snapped, my anger boiling to the surface. "Because I've got video evidence that says otherwise." Matt and Sarah sat there, shell-shocked. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air, and Emily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I made a mistake," she choked out. "I was lonely and I—" "You were selfish," I interrupted coldly. "You didn't care about me, about our marriage, about anything but your own desires." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "Emily, how could you do this? To Jake, of all people?" Emily buried her face in her hands, unable to respond. Matt, ever the voice of reason, finally spoke up. "Jake, what are you planning to do? Are you guys going to try to work through this?" I laughed bitterly. "Work through it? No, Matt. There's no coming back from this." Emily looked up, her face blotchy and red. "Jake, please. I'll do anything to fix this." "It's too late for that," I said, my voice icy. "You destroyed what we had, and there's no repairing it." After Matt and Sarah left, the house was suffocatingly quiet. Emily tried to approach me again, but I shut her down. "Jake, we can't just leave it like this," she pleaded. "Oh, we're not leaving it like this," I said, my voice firm. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Every single person you've lied to is going to see the real you." Her face twisted in panic. "What are you talking about?" "You'll see," I said, walking past her and heading to the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping. That night, I started making a list: her parents, her friends, her yoga instructors, everyone who needed to know the truth. If Emily thought she could hide in the shadows, she was dead wrong. The next morning, I woke up to find Emily gone. Her car was missing, and a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter read, "Jake, I'm staying at my mom's for a few days. I need time to think. Please don't make this worse than it already is." I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Emily's absence from the house brought a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I could think clearly without the weight of her presence suffocating me. But it also gave me the space to plan my next moves without interference. Her note about staying at her mom's wasn't surprising. She'd always run to her mother, Diane, when things got tough. Diane had a knack for coddling Emily, treating her like a delicate flower even when she was dead wrong. If Emily thought Diane's house would be a safe haven, she was in for a rude awakening. I pulled out my laptop and went through my contact list. Diane was first on my list. She deserved to know the truth about her daughter, and I wasn't going to hold back. That afternoon, I drove to Diane's house. It was a modest 2-story home in the suburbs, the kind of place where everything looked perfect on the surface. I rang the doorbell, and Diane answered a few moments later, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Jake." "What a surprise," she said warmly. Come in, come in." I stepped inside, the familiar scent of her lavender candles filling the air. "Is Emily here?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Diane's smile faltered. "She is, but she's been very upset. She told me you two had a fight." "A fight?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Is that how she put it?" "Jake, what's going on?" Diane asked, her concern deepening. "Where is she?" I asked, ignoring the question. "She's upstairs," Diane said hesitantly. "Jake, please." I didn't wait for her to finish. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding. When I reached the guest room, I pushed the door open without knocking. Emily was sitting on the bed, her knees drawn to her chest. She looked up, startled, as I entered. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaky. "We're going to talk," I said coldly. "No more running away." Diane appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. "Jake, please, let's keep this civil." "Civil?" I turned to her, my voice rising. "Did she tell you what she did? Did she tell you she's been cheating on me for months?" Diane's face went pale, and she turned to Emily. "What is he talking about?" "Mom, Emily stammered, her eyes darting between us. "She didn't tell you, did she?" I pressed. "She's been sneaking around with other men. I have proof, photos, videos, the whole damn thing." "Jake, stop!" Emily shouted, her voice breaking. Diane sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her mouth. "Emily, is this true?" Emily burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for it to happen." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped. "You didn't mean to climb into bed with 3 different men?" "Jake, enough," Diane said sharply, standing up. "You've made your point." "No," I said firmly. "I haven't. You need to know who your daughter really is. She's not the perfect wife you think she is. She's a liar and a cheater, and she's destroyed our marriage." Emily's sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. She needed to face the consequences of her actions. "Jake, I think you should leave," Diane said, her voice trembling. I stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. But don't expect me to clean up her mess." I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with messages. Word was spreading fast. Matt and Sarah must have shared what I told them, and now everyone in our circle was talking. One message stood out. It was from Greg. "Greg Dawson, Jake, I need to talk to you. Please call me." I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether to respond. Eventually, curiosity won out, and I dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Jake," he said, his voice tense. "Thank God. Listen, I know you're pissed at me, and you have every right to be. But my wife found out." "Good," I said flatly. "She deserved to know. She kicked me out," Greg continued. "And she told me she's filing for divorce. My whole life is falling apart, man. I need to know, did you tell her?" "No," I said. "She probably figured it out on her own. Or maybe karma finally caught up to you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jake," I'm sorry. For everything. Save it, I said, my voice cold. I don't want your apologies. I just want you out of my life. And with that I hung up. The fallout from Emily's betrayal was spreading like wildfire, and I wasn't about to let it die down. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how messy it got. The days following my confrontation with Emily and her mother felt like a whirlwind. Word of Emily's infidelity spread quickly, and the people in our lives began to choose sides. Some of our mutual friends reached out to offer their support, while others avoided me entirely, unsure of how to navigate the chaos. Matt and Sarah stood firmly by my side, their outrage on my behalf palpable. You don't deserve this, Jake, Matt told me over a beer one evening. Emily had no right to drag you through the mud like this. Thanks, I said, though the words felt hollow. Their support was appreciated, but it didn't ease the ache of betrayal. Emily, meanwhile, seemed to be unraveling. She stayed at her mother's house, but I knew she wasn't faring well. Diane called me a few days later, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. Jake, you've humiliated her enough, Diane said. She's made mistakes, but she's still the mother of your children. We don't have kids, Diane, I said coldly. And she didn't make a mistake. She made a series of choices, each one worse than the last. She's sorry, Diane pleaded. She wants to work things out. I laughed bitterly. Sorry? She's only sorry because she got caught. There's nothing left to work out. Diane sighed heavily. You're really going to throw everything away? 7 years of marriage? She threw it away the moment she decided I wasn't enough. I snapped. Don't call me again, Diane. Your daughter can deal with the consequences of her actions. I hung up before she could respond. Later that evening, I received a text from Emily. Emily, Jake, please. Can we talk? I know I've hurt you, but I want to make things right. Her audacity was astounding. I ignored the message, but she persisted. Emily, I'm begging you. Just give me a chance to explain. Still, I didn't respond. The truth was, I didn't care to hear her excuses. I was done with her lies and manipulation. The next day, I decided to take things a step further. I gathered the evidence I had, the video from Bill, the text I'd uncovered, the receipts for her secret rendezvous, and started organizing them into a neat package. My plan was to send it to everyone who mattered, her yoga friends, her colleagues, even her extended family. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure everyone saw the real Emily, the selfish, deceitful woman who had torn our marriage apart. As I compiled the evidence, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. Emily had played her games in the dark for too long. It was time to drag her into the light. That evening, I hit send on the email. Within minutes, my phone lit up with notifications. Some responses were immediate, shocked messages from her friends, horrified texts from her cousins. By the time I went to bed, Emily's reputation was in tatters. The following morning, I woke to a pounding on the front door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, her face streaked with tears. Jake, what did you do? She demanded, her voice trembling. I told the truth, I said coolly. You've ruined my life, she cried. No, Emily, I said, my voice rising. You ruined your life. You had a choice, and you chose to betray me. Now you get to live with the consequences. Her tears turned to anger. You're cruel, Jake. You think this makes you the better person? You're just as bad as me. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I didn't destroy our marriage. So don't you dare try to compare us. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Finally, she turned and walked away, slamming the door behind her. The fallout from my actions was swift and brutal. Emily's friends abandoned her in droves, and her yoga studio canceled her membership. Even her colleagues started to distance themselves, wary of being associated with her tarnished reputation. And yet, I felt no remorse. She'd played the role of the perfect wife while stabbing me in the back, and now the world knew the truth. But as the days passed, a new emotion began to creep in: emptiness. The satisfaction of exposing her had faded, leaving behind a hollow void. I'd destroyed Emily's life, but in doing so, I'd destroyed a part of myself as well. The days after Emily's meltdown at the door were eerily quiet. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up unannounced. It was as though she had disappeared entirely, retreating into the wreckage of her life. For a while, I felt relieved. Her absence was a balm for my frayed nerves. But as the quiet stretched on, the emptiness returned, deeper and heavier than before. I filled the hours with work, diving into projects and deadlines in an attempt to distract myself. Nights were harder. The house felt too big, too empty. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of what was missing, even if it was something I no longer wanted. One evening, Matt came over unannounced, carrying a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you could use some company," he said as he set the bottles on the counter. I appreciated the gesture more than I let on. We sat on the porch, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the yard, and talked about anything but Emily. Work, sports, the latest drama in the neighborhood. It was a welcome reprieve. But eventually, Matt brought her up. "You doing okay, man?" he asked, his tone cautious. I stared at the amber liquid in my bottle. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel better after everything, but I don't. I just feel empty." Matt nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's because you haven't moved on. You're stuck in this cycle, man. The anger, the revenge, it's all consuming you. What am I supposed to do? Pretend it didn't happen? Of course not," he said. "But you've got to let it go at some point. Otherwise, she's still controlling you, even from a distance." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. That night, I lay awake, replaying Matt's advice in my head. He was right. As much as I hated to admit it, Emily still had a hold on me. The anger, the bitterness, it all kept me tied to her. But letting go felt impossible. How do you move on from someone who betrayed you so completely? The next morning, I woke to a knock on the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Diane standing there, clutching a manila envelope. "Jake," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting her in. She looked exhausted, her face lined with worry. "What's this about?" I asked as she sat at the kitchen table. She placed the envelope in front of her but didn't hand it to me immediately. "Emily asked me to give this to you," she said. I stared at the envelope, my stomach twisting. "What is it?" She said, "It's everything. The whole truth." I didn't move. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "She's leaving town, Jake," Diane continued. "She's moving in with her cousin in Seattle. She said she can't stay here after everything that's happened." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "Good," I said. Diane flinched but nodded. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But she's my daughter, Jake. I can't just abandon her, no matter what she's done." I didn't respond. After a long pause, Diane stood up, leaving the envelope on the table. "Take care of yourself," she said quietly before walking out. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the envelope. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, pages long. As I read it, a mix of emotions washed over me: anger, sadness, disbelief. Emily laid everything bare: her reasons, her regrets, her apologies. She admitted that the affair hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment mistake, but something she'd allowed to fester over time. She wrote about feeling neglected, about seeking validation in the wrong places, about hating herself for what she'd done. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote. "I don't even deserve it. But I needed you to know that none of this was your fault. You gave me everything, and I threw it away. I'll regret that for the rest of my life." At the bottom of the envelope was a small stack of photos, pictures of us from happier times. Vacations, holidays, candid moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I burned the letter and the photos that night. Watching the flames consume them felt strangely cathartic, like shedding a skin I no longer wanted to wear. The next few weeks were a blur. Emily left town, just as Diane said she would. People stopped talking about the scandal, moving on to the next piece of gossip. But I wasn't the same. I felt like a shell of the person I used to be, hollowed out by everything that had happened. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized something. I was done letting Emily dictate my life. The anger, the pain, it was all hers to carry now, not mine. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Months passed, and life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The house, once filled with the tension of a crumbling marriage, felt different now, quieter, calmer, but also emptier. I'd packed away the remnants of our shared life, boxing up memories that no longer felt like mine. Emily's absence was both a relief and a reminder of everything I'd lost. It wasn't just her, it was the life I thought we had, the trust one thought was unshakable. One afternoon, I decided to visit the park where I'd first met Emily. It was a beautiful autumn day, the trees blazing with red and gold, and the air crisp and invigorating. As I sat on a bench near the pond, I thought back to that day years ago when we'd first crossed paths. She'd been feeding the ducks, laughing at their antics, and her joy had been infectious. That memory felt like a cruel joke now, a snapshot of a life that had been nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. But as I watched the families strolling by, children laughing and couples holding hands, I realized something. Life was still moving. The world hadn't stopped because my marriage had imploded. I started going to therapy a few weeks later. At first, it felt pointless, reopening old wounds I was desperate to forget. But over time, it helped. Talking through the pain, the betrayal, and the anger with someone who wasn't tied to the situation gave me a clarity I hadn't expected. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Hansen, helped me see what I'd been blind to for years. My relationship with Emily had been fragile long before the affair. We'd both stopped investing in each other, and the cracks in our foundation had grown wider with time. "It's not about blame," she said during one session. "It's about understanding. You don't have to forgive her, but you do have to forgive yourself. You were doing the best you could with what you knew at the time." Those words stuck with me. Emily, true to her word, stayed in Seattle. I didn't hear from her again, and I was okay with that. Diane occasionally called to check in, but our conversations were brief and impersonal. She knew better than to push for reconciliation. Greg Dawson, the man whose name had been seared into my memory, disappeared from my life as well. His wife filed for divorce, and the last I heard, he'd moved out of state. The wreckage of the affair had claimed more than one victim, but for the first time, I didn't feel like one of them. 6 months after Emily left, I found myself at a friend's barbecue. It was a sunny spring afternoon, the air filled with the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of laughter. I hadn't planned on going, it still felt strange to socialize, but Matt had insisted. "You need to get out of that house, man," he'd said. "Come on, it'll be fun." As I stood near the grill, beer in hand, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Rachel. She was warm and easy to talk to, with a quick wit that caught me off guard. We laughed about the awkwardness of small talk and bonded over our shared love of bad 80s movies. When she asked about my past, I hesitated. For so long, I'd let the story of Emily's betrayal define me. But as I looked into Rachel's kind eyes, I realized I didn't have to carry that weight anymore. "I've been through some stuff," I said simply. "But I'm working on moving forward." She smiled, her gaze steady. "Aren't we all?" Rachel and I exchanged numbers that day. I didn't know where things would go, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than anger or sadness. I felt hope. The road ahead wasn't easy, and I knew I'd carry the scars of my marriage for years to come. But they didn't feel like a burden anymore. They felt like reminders of lessons learned, painful, yes, but necessary. Emily's betrayal had shattered the life I thought I wanted, but it had also forced me to confront the parts of myself I'd been too afraid to face. And in the rubble of my old life, I was slowly starting to build something new. Something better.